Good morning, everybody. Am I audible?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning.
We have a join. Okay. Today I'll be discussing regarding heart failure, pathophysiology of heart failure, right? And case-based main question or long essay type question on heart failure can be asked in your final examination. And in your practical, heart failure is one of the clinical questions that is given for 5 marks. Okay. So, and heart failure, it is important throughout your career as a physician. You must be able to recognize and treat the patients with heart failure, right? So not only academically but also from the patient perspective, heart failure is important. Okay, so you better sit with a pen and paper so that I ask you all to note down few things. You can note down those points whenever I'll be telling you to note down. Okay, because at the end you have to discuss I am going to give a case scenario that you have to discuss, right? So why you need to study heart failure? Okay, so you can see that the number of cases or incidence of heart failure is steadily increasing. So it is a major public health problem and it affects about 23 million people globally, and it is having a high 5-year mortality rate. Okay, then about 75% of individuals older than 65 years may suffer from heart failure, and this is heart failure is responsible for 20% of all hospital admissions in individuals older than 65 years. Okay, so it is common in elderly beyond 65 years. Whatever heart failure patients you are getting, if you are looking at the age of the patients, about 75% of the heart failure patients are older than 65 years. Clear? So this is the global burden of heart failure. Okay. Now, what is heart failure? So we have been discussing all these days that heart, it is a pump. It is a pump which will be continuously ejecting blood to bring about perfusion of the tissues. So to function it as a pump, it must relax, get filled with blood, then later it must contract and eject blood. Okay, so that is the basic function of the heart. When the heart fails as a pump, that is when it is not able to maintain a adequate cardiac output to maintain the needs of the tissues and organs, it is called as heart failure. That is failure of the heart as a pump. In simple words, the heart fails to pump blood. Or to what extent it fails? Failure is, it is not, the pumping of the heart is not sufficient to meet the requirements of the tissues and organs. That is heart failure. Okay. Now there are different types of heart failure, right? So there is acute and chronic heart failure, systolic and diastolic heart failure, right-sided or left-sided heart failure, high output or low output heart failure. So these are the different types. Ultimately, in all the types, there is failure of the heart as a pump where it is not able to pump blood that is sufficient to meet the requirements of the tissues. Okay. So these are the different types, same thing, left-sided versus right-sided heart failure, because there are two pumps, right pump and left pump. Systolic versus diastolic failure, high output versus low output failure, acute versus chronic heart failure. Then left-sided versus right-sided heart failure. So right pump is the right ventricle. So normally what right ventricle does, it pumps blood from the systemic circulation into the pulmonary circulation. When the right ventricle fails to pump blood into the pulmonary circulation, it is called as right heart failure. Okay. Left ventricle pumps blood from the pulmonary circulation into the systemic circulation. So whatever oxygenated blood is there from the pulmonary circulation, it pushes it into the systemic circulation. So failure of the left ventricle to pump blood from the pulmonary circulation into a systemic circulation is called as left-sided heart failure. Okay. Now, whenever there is failure of the right ventricle or the left ventricle, blood begins to dam or it begins to accumulate behind the failing ventricle. For example, here, this is the left side of the heart. So when the left ventricle fails to pump blood into systemic circulation, the blood begins to first accumulate in the left atrium and then into the pulmonary circulation. Clear? So whatever is the structure behind that starts getting pooled with blood or blood starts accumulating in that circulation. So left heart failure, the blood backs up in the pulmonary circulation. Okay. In the right heart failure, the blood starts damming in the systemic circulation. Okay. Systemic circulation. So the right atrium receives blood, venous blood from the whole of the body from superior and inferior vena cava, pumps it into the right ventricle. The right ventricle pushes it into the pulmonary circulation. So when the right ventricle fails, the blood begins to accumulate in the right atrium first and then in the systemic veins, increasing the systemic venous pressure and also increasing the systemic or the capillary pressure. Clear? So whenever the heart fails, the blood starts collecting or damming in the circulation behind it. For example, in the left ventricle, it is in the pulmonary circuit. For the right ventricle, the blood starts damming in the systemic circulation. Okay. So when blood starts accumulating in the pulmonary circulation, that is, it starts staying there, the pulmonary capillary pressure increases and there is transudation of fluid from the pulmonary capillaries into the interstitium of the lungs and then into the alveoli, resulting in pulmonary edema. Okay. So when blood starts accumulating in the pulmonary circulation, the pulmonary capillary pressure increases. Because of the increased capillary pressure, fluid starts moving out from the circulation into the interstitium of the lung and finally into the alveoli, resulting in pulmonary edema. Right, this is in left-sided heart failure. Okay, so in right-sided heart failure, once there is pooling or congestion of the systemic circulation, the systemic venous pressure increases, which is again reflected to the capillaries. The systemic capillary pressure increases. From the capillaries, the fluid will be transferred or will escape. Because of the increased pressure, the fluid will start moving from the circulation into the interstitium of the tissues, resulting in peripheral edema and congestion of abdominal organs. Okay, so right-sided heart failure, peripheral edema, left-sided heart failure, pulmonary edema. These two things you can note down. So in right-sided heart failure, blood backs up in the systemic circulation, resulting in peripheral edema. Left-sided heart failure, blood backs up in the pulmonary circulation, resulting in pulmonary edema. Okay, these 2 points you note down because it will be useful for this discussion further. Okay. Till this point, any doubts you have? Any doubts? Okay. Right.
No, ma'am, please continue.
Okay, if any one of you have unmuted your audio, please mute it because there is disturbance in the background. Now, systolic versus diastolic failure, right? So in systolic failure, the heart is weak to propel the blood into circulation, that is systolic failure. So there is weakness in the contraction of the heart. The myocardial contraction is weak or poor. Hence there is impaired ejection of blood from the heart during systole, that is called as systolic failure. The common cause of systolic failure are ischemic heart disease. Okay. Increased pressure work on the heart, that is there is increased blood pressure. The heart is trying to pump enough blood to overcome the increased blood pressure. Okay, in the long run, if the high blood pressure is not controlled, the heart fails as a pump. Okay, so in systolic failure there is reduced ejection fraction. We have already discussed ejection fraction. In the subsequent slides also I'll be telling regarding ejection fraction. Okay, so here in systolic failure there is impaired contraction of the myocardium, or there is poor contraction of the cardiac muscle, or the cardiac muscle, there is weak contraction of the cardiac muscle, therefore it is not able to eject blood, that is called a systolic failure. In diastolic failure there is impaired filling of the ventricles. Okay, for the heart to eject blood it should be adequately filled. If it is not properly filled, then the ejection will reduce. So if there is failure of the proper filling of the ventricles, it is called as diastolic failure. Okay, so you have systolic failure, diastolic failure. Systolic failure is impaired contraction, diastolic failure is impaired filling of the ventricles. Okay, because there are several reasons. One is because the chamber size is small. Second, there is ventricular hypertrophy. Again, the chamber size is small, or the ventricles are not compliant, or there is restriction to the filling of the ventricles from outside. Okay, like cardiac tamponade. When there is huge accumulation of excess fluid in the pericardial cavity, it is not allowing it is compressing the ventricles from outside, and therefore there is failure of proper filling of the ventricles. Okay, so these are some of the causes of diastolic failure. Usually in diastolic failure the ejection fraction is not reduced. Okay, ejection fraction is maintained. So heart failure with maintained ejection fraction. Then high output versus low output heart failure. High output heart failure. In high output heart failure, the heart functioning is supernormal. That is, it is trying hard to maintain the cardiac output. It is functioning at a very high rate, but even the high cardiac output is not able to maintain the excessive metabolic needs of the tissues. This is seen in severe anemia, thyrotoxicosis, arteriovenous fistula, and sepsis. Then this is high output heart failure. Low output heart failure, that is, as the name suggests, the output by the heart is not adequate to maintain the needs of the tissues. Okay, so these are different terminologies that have been used. Ultimately, it is the failure of the heart to pump blood. Acute versus chronic heart failure. Sudden development of heart failure, sudden reduction in the cardiac output is called as acute heart failure. Okay, so this acute heart failure is most commonly seen following myocardial infarction. Chronic heart failure is a gradually, slowly progressive decrease in the pumping action of the heart. That is chronic heart failure. Okay. Then, usually in chronic heart failure, the compensator mechanisms are trying to maintain the cardiac output. In chronic heart failure, with compensation, if there is sudden exacerbation or worsening of the symptoms, it is seen in, it is called as acute decompensation in chronic heart failure. Okay, so remember two things here: acute heart failure is a sudden onset of cardiac failure. Chronic heart failure is a slowly progressive or gradual onset of heart failure. There are different causes for heart failure. This is just a table. Okay, so the most common cause is coronary artery disease and hypertension. Okay, so these are the different causes. It could be valvular heart disease, it could be myocardial disease, endocardial disease, arrhythmias or conduction defects, congenital heart diseases, volume overload, high output states, or pericardial disease. Okay, so these are the several causes of heart failure. Common cause is coronary artery disease and hypertension. Okay, at this stage you need not remember all these things. Okay, all the etiological factors you need not remember. The common ones like coronary artery disease, hypertension, valvular heart diseases, arrhythmia you can remember. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so whatever may be the cause of heart failure, ultimately the heart failure results because of impaired ability of the myocardial fibers to contract or relax or both. Okay, so initially it may be the left heart failure, but ultimately in the long run both the left heart failure may culminate into the right heart failure also. Okay, so the patient will not have typically only left heart failure or only right heart failure. So since both the pumps are interdependent, in the long run, if one pump fails or the one side of the heart fails, the other side of the heart also fails. So ejection fraction. Okay, ejection fraction I had already discussed it in my previous classes. So it is the fraction of the end diastolic volume that is ejected during each stroke is the ejection fraction. Normal is 60 to 80%. Okay, so in systolic failure, it is ejection fraction is less than 40%. Okay, and in diastolic failure, the ejection fraction is more than 50%. It is called as ejection fraction, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, HFpEF. So heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Okay, clear? So ejection fraction, it is the fraction of the end diastolic volume that is ejected out during each stroke. Okay, so ejection fraction, it is decreased in systolic failure, it is preserved in diastolic failure, although if you are looking at the absolute value of the cardiac output is decreased even in diastolic failure. Okay, clear? So these are the various compensatory mechanisms that are activated during heart failure. One is sympathetic nervous system activation, renin angiotensin aldosterone activation, myocardial hypertrophy and remodeling. Okay, so once you are thorough with the regulation of blood pressure, okay, you can understand any of the compensatory mechanisms that are taking place in any of the cardiovascular diseases. Because ultimately when cardiac output decreases, the blood pressure falls, perfusion of the tissues falls. So whatever compensatory mechanisms had been activated for the fall in blood pressure, similar ones will come here. Like whenever the blood pressure falls, there is sympathetic nervous system activation you have already studied. There is renin angiotensin aldosterone activation you have studied. Okay, and changes in the heart to try to maintain the things again, changes in the cardiac muscle proper. Okay, so once that's why I have already been have been repeatedly telling you that thoroughly study the regulation of blood pressure. Once you thoroughly study the regulation of blood pressure, then everything else you can understand very easily, because ultimately it is the blood pressure and the heart rate that has to be maintained. So if heart functions fails as a pump, ultimately cardiac output decrease, blood pressure falls, and all the regulator mechanisms will again come into action here. Okay, so heart failure. What happens when the heart fails to pump blood? Cardiac output decreases, blood pressure decreases, baroreceptor activation will be there, is resulting in increased sympathetic activity that tries to increase the heart rate and cardiac output and contractility. Okay, now because of the decreased perfusion to the kidneys or decreased blood flow to the tissues, there is activation of renin angiotensin aldosterone mechanism, release of angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 will try to it's a vasoconstrictor, it also acts on the kidneys, it also causes the release of aldosterone. All this we have studied. Okay, so ultimately there is fluid retention, because blood volume is an important determinant of cardiac output and the blood pressure. So the kidneys will try to retain the fluid, which increases the preload, increases the cardiac output. Okay, now because the heart is trying hard, there is some modulation at the genetic level, the genes are getting activated and there is growth in the myocytes. So there is hypertrophy of the individual cardiac muscle fibers, resulting in cardiac hypertrophy, either left ventricular hypertrophy or right ventricular hypertrophy. So these are all the compensatory mechanisms which are getting activated during heart failure. Initially, these compensatory mechanisms are trying to maintain the cardiac output even though the heart is failing. This is called as compensated heart failure. Clear? So even though the heart is failing, there is decrease in the cardiac output, but the decrease in the cardiac output initially in the early stages, they are not noticed by the patient, or the patient doesn't develop any signs and symptoms because of these compensatory mechanisms. It is called as compensated heart failure. But these compensatory mechanisms, they cannot maintain the cardiac output and blood pressure, other parameters for long, and these compensatory mechanisms in severe and prolonged heart failure, they lose their effectiveness, and that is called as decompensated heart failure. Clear? So two terms you must know here, compensated and decompensated heart failure. Clear? So in the early stages, the compensatory mechanisms are activated, and the failing heart, the decrease in cardiac function, they're not coming to the notice of the patient. The patient is not developing any frank signs and symptoms. This is called compensated heart failure. But you all know that the compensatory mechanisms cannot run for long, and they can't maintain the cardiac function for a longer period. So when these compensatory mechanisms are no longer effective, the patient will develop the full-fledged signs and symptoms of heart failure, that is called as decompensated heart failure. Okay, right? So these are the compensatory mechanisms. One is sympathetic nervous system activation, second is renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, and hypertrophy of the cardiac muscle fibers. So this is two types of remodeling you can see. Here there is increase in the thickness of the ventricular wall. Here this is another type of this is called as concentric ventricular remodeling. Okay, so here the diameter of the cardiac muscle fiber increases. Okay, thickness of the ventricular wall increases. This is called as eccentric remodeling. Okay, here the length of the cardiac muscle fiber increases, individual cardiac muscle fiber length increases, therefore there is dilatation of the chamber. Okay, so these are two different types. Although they are remodeling, there are two different types. One is left ventricular hypertrophy, this is concentric hypertrophy, this is eccentric hypertrophy. Okay, so here the chamber size is increased, here the thickness of the ventricular wall is increased. So this is in nutshell the pathophysiology of the heart failure. Okay, so when the heart fails, see, a variety of disorders can lead to low output or high output failure. So the inability of the heart to provide sufficient output to meet the demands of the body. Clear? So whenever any ventricle fails, the blood is pooled behind it. For example, in the left ventricle, it is pooled in the pulmonary circulation. In the right ventricle, it is pooled in the systemic circulation. So the lungs are telling that they are getting backed up, do your job. Okay. Now, because there is decreased pumping action of the heart, the various compensatory mechanisms are coming into action. Because as the cardiac output decreases, the blood flow to the kidney decreases. Okay. Now, the kidneys will start retaining more salt and water. Okay, which increases the blood volume. As the blood volume increases, the venous return increases, the preload increases. Okay. At the same time, the angiotensin 2, renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism is activated. The angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. It brings about vasoconstriction, thereby increasing the afterload. Okay. Now there is increased sympathetic nervous system activated. Increased sympathetic nervous system activity, which is signaling the heart and trying to make the heart to contract with more force and with a greater rate. Okay, so these are all the compensatory mechanisms. Initially, these compensatory mechanisms try to maintain the heart rate, but in the long run, these compensatory mechanisms itself will worsen the heart failure further. Okay, so this is renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, then the renal mechanism of salt and water retention, and increased sympathetic nervous system activity. Okay, and the heart itself shows dilatation and hypertrophy. Okay, so this is in nutshell This is mind mapping, okay, of pathophysiology of heart failure. So by such figures, you can remember the pathophysiology. So three compensatory mechanisms you have to remember. One is increased sympathetic nervous system activity. Second one is renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. Third one is ventricular remodeling or cardiac remodeling. Now, what are the manifestations? How will the patient with heart failure present? Okay. Now, the patient with heart failure is restless, presents with mental fatigue, confusion, anxiety, impaired memory because of inadequate blood flow to the brain. Okay. Then generalized weakness, fatigue, exercise intolerance, lethargic. The patient is always fatigued or lethargic and the person can't do any kind of exercise because this is because of inadequate blood flow to the skeletal muscles. Right. Then since the blood flow to the kidneys is decreasing, the urine output decreases, oliguria, and the kidneys will start retaining water and salt. So whatever is being filtered, little is being filtered, is getting reabsorbed back, sodium and water retention with fluid retention. Okay. Then anorexia and abdominal discomfort, because again congestion of the abdominal organs, decreased blood flow to the gastrointestinal tract will impair the digestion and absorption. Okay, so these are all individual organs. If blood supply to the brain decreases, the person will be restless or will have impaired memory, mental fatigue. Blood supply to skeletal muscle decreases, generalized fatigue, lethargy, exercise intolerance. Blood flow to the kidney decreases, decreased urine output and followed by salt and water retention. Decreased blood flow to the GI tract, there is anorexia, that is loss of appetite and abdominal discomfort. Okay, so these are not out of the world manifestation. You think of individual organ, what is happening, and then go on writing the clinical manifestations. Right. So it will become easy for you all to remember this clinical manifestation if you go organ wise. Start with the brain, skeletal muscle, kidneys, GIT. Right. Then these terms you must remember. Exertional dyspnea. So you write down these terms. First one is exertional dyspnea. Dyspnea is difficulty in breathing or shortness of breathing, or the patient complains of breathlessness. Dyspnea. Okay. So if dyspnea occurs on exertion or exercise, it is called as exertional dyspnea. Right. All of us have experienced exertional dyspnea, but the level of activity what we experience exertional dyspnea, when you are comparing it with the heart failure patient, it is reduced. Okay, understand? So exertional dyspnea all of us have experienced. Suppose I climb 5 stairs and then I develop exertional dyspnea. Heart failure patient walking few steps or climbing one floor only, the person may develop exertional dyspnea. So the level of activity at which the patient develops dyspnea is important here. And exertional dyspnea occurs early in the heart failure. Okay, early stages of heart failure, there is exertional dyspnea. Because whenever the person or the individual exercise or we exercise, the heart has to increase its cardiac output to meet the increased needs of the tissues. Now here in heart failure, the heart is already failing as a pump. It cannot further increase the increased demand that is taking place during exertion, resulting in exertional dyspnea. Okay, so this is one new term for you, exertional dyspnea. Third one is dyspnea at rest. Initially it is exertional dyspnea, then even at rest the person will start developing dyspnea. Okay, this is because of the pulmonary congestion. So whenever the left ventricle fails, I told that the blood starts pooling in the pulmonary circulation. So once the blood starts remaining in the pulmonary circulation, the pulmonary venous pressure increases, pulmonary capillary pressure increases. Okay. So as the pulmonary capillary pressure increases, more fluid is getting transduced or it is moving out of the capillaries into the interstitium of the lungs and into the alveoli, resulting in pulmonary edema. Now this pulmonary edema affects the gaseous exchange in the lungs, resulting in dyspnea. So initially it is exertional dyspnea. With the worsening of heart failure, dyspnea at rest. Even the normal day-to-day activities the person can't do. Okay. So this is the second clinical manifestation. Third is orthopnea. This is the third new term that you are learning today, orthopnea. Orthopnea is dyspnea on lying down. So as long as the patient is sitting, he is fine, he or she is fine. Once the patient lies down, the person develops breathlessness or shortness of breath or difficulty in breathing. So that is called as orthopnea. So when you take proper history, the patients usually tell that once they lie down, they get breathless, so they take the support of pillows. Okay, so they take the support of pillows. So normally we all use one pillow. So the patient with heart failure may be using multiple pillows, 2 or 3 pillows. He may be taking the support and lying down. Okay, so this will be, you can elicit this on history when you're asking the patients with heart failure. Okay, so what is orthopnea? Orthopnea is dyspnea on lying down or in recumbent position. It is relieved by sitting upright. So once the patient lies down, the patient develops dyspnea. Because of the breathlessness, the patient gets up and sits in the upright posture. So in this posture, the dyspnea is relieved. Okay, so the patient now tries to sleep in propped up position with lot of pillows, taking pillow support from lot of pillows. So why this happens? Orthopnea, because on lying down, there is pooling of blood. Normally when you are walking about, there is some pooling of blood in the veins of the lower limb because of the effect of gravity. There is some excess blood present in the veins of the lower limbs. As we lie down, the venous return, there will be redistribution of blood from the veins of the lower limb. The venous return increases. Okay, so the load the heart is receiving increases. Now the heart has already failed as a pump. If it receives greater volume of blood, it can't handle that excess volume and again gets pooled in the pulmonary circulation, resulting in dyspnea. Okay, so orthopnea causes redistribution of blood from the veins of the lower limb. Second reason is because the diaphragm is getting pushed up towards the lungs in supine position. Okay, that's why the person develops orthopnea. So this is third term that you are learning. Okay, one was exertional dyspnea, dyspnea at rest. Third is orthopnea. The fourth term that you are learning, new term, is paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Sudden acute episodes of breathlessness that occur about 1 to 3 hours after the patient falls asleep, and these episodes of breathlessness awaken the patient from sleep. It is called as paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, nocturnal at night. Dyspnea, shortness of breathing. Paroxysmal episodes of such dyspnea occurring at night is called as paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Clear? So acute, then severe episodes of shortness of breath that occur about 1 to 3 hours after the patient falls asleep, and these episodes of breathlessness, they awaken the patient from sleep, is called as paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Okay, so what is the reason for this? Paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea occurs because of depression of the respiratory center during sleep. And the second reason again because of the congestion of the lungs because of redistribution of fluid from the lower extremities into the central circulation. Okay, so these important terms you must know. At the end of heart failure class, you must know what is dyspnea, what is exertional dyspnea, what is orthopnea, what is paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Okay, then dependent edema. Right, now since the blood flow to the kidneys is reduced, the kidneys will start retaining more of salt and water. Okay, now because of the increased blood volume, the venous pressure is increased, capillary pressure is increased, and there is increased filtration of fluid from the circulation into the interstitium, resulting in interstitial edema. Now in ambulatory patients who are moving about, this edema is seen in the dependent parts of the body, that is in the ankle and in the foot. If the person is bedridden, the edema is seen around the sacral region. This is called as dependent edema, and it is spitting type of edema. So if you apply pressure over the lower aspect of the leg for a few seconds, you will see a pit or a dimple. This is called as spitting edema. Okay, because this is because of retention of salt and water causing venous congestion, which increases the venous pressure, Increase in venous pressure increases the capillary pressure. Increased capillary pressure will cause filtration of fluid. Fluid will get accumulated in the interstitium. So in ambulatory patients who are walking about, it is pedal edema. In bedridden patients, it is sacral edema. This is the fifth point that you have learned, dependent edema. That too, pitting dependent edema, pitting type it is called. Hepatomegaly, because there is back pressure everywhere. So right heart fails, systemic circulation is congested, the veins in the liver is congested. Okay, venous pressure, portal venous pressure is increasing, so there is enlargement of the liver, and this enlarged liver is tender. So if you palpate the liver, the patient feels the pain. It is tender hepatomegaly. It is because of hepatic congestion. Right. Then next important sign is you can see these congested veins in the jugular veins in the neck. Normally in you and me in upright posture, no neck veins are visible, particularly jugular veins. So in heart failure, because of the increased right atrial pressure, the pressure in the jugular veins is increased and they're getting congested. So these are congested jugular veins because of the increased right atrial pressure. So it is a most reliable sign of congestive cardiac failure, and it indicates fluid overload because of the decreased blood flow to the kidneys, more and more of fluid is getting retained. So blood volume increases, then venous return increases. Then since the heart is failing as a pump, the blood accumulates in the right atrium, the right atrial pressure increases. Since the right atrial pressure is increasing, it is getting reflected in the jugular veins. The jugular venous pressure increases and there is congestion of the jugular vein. Right? Ascites, accumulation of excess free fluid in the peritoneal cavity. So this is seen in advanced stage of heart failure. Again, this is because of venous congestion, increased capillary pressure, increased filtration. Okay, so that was ascites. Right. So all these are the clinical manifestations of heart failure. Again, the patient may present with cyanosis, bluish discoloration of skin, particularly around the mouth. Okay, clear? And patient may sometimes present with dry cough, then pink frothy sputum, right? And if you are auscultating the lungs, you can hear some abnormal sounds called as crackles. Right. So these are some of the clinical manifestations of heart failure. So this is again a diagrammatic representation. Dyspnea, shortness of breath, swelling of the feet and leg. Because of that, the footwear will not fit to the leg of the patient. Then the patient is always fatigued, lethargic because of decreased blood flow to the skeletal muscle. Then difficulty sleeping at night because of orthopnea and paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Then tender hepatomegaly, then cough with frothy sputum, increased urination at night called nocturia, then confusion and or impaired memory. So these are the symptoms of heart failure. Okay. Now make a note of this. Some of the symptoms, whatever I have discussed, some of the symptoms are more common in one-side heart failure. For example, in left-sided heart failure, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea, right? Then cyanosis, fatigue, exertional dyspnea are common because in the left heart failure there is pulmonary congestion. So in left heart failure there is paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea. Clear? So these are common in left-sided heart failure. In right-sided heart failure, because there is systemic venous congestion, there is distended jugular veins, hepatomegaly, dependent edema. Okay, common in right-sided heart failure. This you must know. Only then you can make out whether it is right-sided or left-sided heart failure. Okay, so if the patient comes with paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea, cyanosis, think of left-sided heart failure. Patient presents with dependent edema, jugular veins are distended, jugular venous pressure is increased, dependent edema, enlarged liver, ascites, it is right heart failure. Okay, so these two things you must remember. Okay, so make a note of this. Left side heart failure, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea. And right side heart failure, distended jugular veins, dependent edema, hepatomegaly, ascites. Some of the symptoms are common for both, like fatigue is common for both. Clinical manifestations. Heart failure. Your Asha, mute your audio. Okay. So this was regarding the clinical manifestations of heart failure, right? Any doubts till here? I'll go forward with the basic principles of management of heart failure. Only I'll be just saying the principles, how you can manage. Any confusion till here? Okay, I'll be starting with physiological basis of management. So this is a list. You need not be worried about the list. So everything has a reason. If you know the reason, then it will be very easy for you to understand. One is adequate rest, then diet, then digitalis, diuretics, dilators, AC inhibitors, angiotensin receptor antagonists, treatment for the primary cause. Okay, so you had studied during regarding the diet, then diuretics, vasodilators, AC inhibitors, angiotensin receptor antagonists, similar which are common. They are used even for hypertension, treatment of hypertension. Okay, why rest? Because you want to give adequate rest to the patient so that the workload of the heart is reduced. Okay, so if the patient moves about, does a lot of work, the load on the heart, or the heart has to pump more blood, or the heart has to maintain the cardiac output to meet for the increased need for oxygen during activity. So you give adequate rest to the patient so that the workload on the heart is reduced. Okay, diet. Since there is salt and water retention in the body, you give a salt restricted diet. If the patient consumes more salt, along with salt, water is retained, there will be fluid overload. Therefore, you are giving a salt restricted diet. Okay, now one example. Okay, suppose you compare the donkey to the heart. This is the preload. This is the afterload. Okay, preload is increased, afterload is increased, the heart is failing. So the manifestations of the heart failure. Now what you do in management is you reduce the preload. How you reduce the preload? By reducing the fluid retention, by reducing the blood volume, or by reducing whatever excess fluid has already been retained as a compensatory mechanisms. Okay, now afterload has been increased, so you want to reduce the afterload. Then you want to increase the pumping ability of the heart. Now how it is done, one by one I will show. Okay, so here the preload of the heart is reduced. Okay, so now diuretics, what they do? Diuretics, they promote the excretion of excess fluid through urine and reduce the preload. So you reduce the preload, the efficiency of the heart is increased. Second, you reduce the afterload. Here the slope is greater, so you reduce the afterload. Okay, by giving vasodilators, you can increase the efficiency of the heart. Okay, then you can increase the efficiency. Pumping ability of the heart itself is increased. Can you see the wheels here? So the pumping ability of the heart itself can be increased by using drugs like digitalis. Digitalis is a sodium potassium ATPase pump inhibitor. By inhibiting the sodium potassium ATPase pump, there is accumulation of there is an increase in the intracellular calcium levels. Now you know that calcium is required for the excitation contraction coupling and cardiac muscle contraction. So you give digitalis, you increase the force of contraction of the cardiac muscle. Then second one, last one, you decrease the myocardial oxygen consumption, you decrease the needs of the heart itself. That is, you try to reduce the heart rate, try to reduce the work of the heart by giving beta blockers. Okay, clear? So first is rest. Second is diet, salt restricted diet, good calorie diet. Digitalis, you are increasing the efficiency of the heart by giving digitalis. Then by giving diuretics, you are reducing the preload. Okay, by giving vasodilators, you are reducing the afterload. By giving angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor, right, you are reducing the levels of angiotensin 2. So once angiotensin 2 levels are reduced, angiotensin 2, you know that it is a potent vasoconstrictor. So you are reducing both preload and afterload if you are giving angiotensin AC converting enzyme inhibitors and angiotensin receptor antagonists. Okay, and treatment of the primary cause. If it is because of hypertension, treat hypertension. If it is because of valvular disease, treat the valvular disease. Okay, if it is because of thyrotoxicosis, severe anemia or arteriovenous fistula, treat it. So underlying cause has to be treated. So this is the physiological basis of management of heart failure. Okay, so if you understand this, then this making list of these things is not a difficult task. Okay. So physiological basis I have explained here. Whatever I have told. Right. So any confusion till here? Any confusion? I'll go with the case scenario. So this case scenario will be given to you during your practical examination. Okay, you have case discussion. So you'll be given several case scenarios for 5 months. And similar case scenarios can be asked to you as a long essay type question. Okay, now what is the case scenario? The patient comes to a doctor with a history of swelling of the legs which increases towards evening. Okay, so it is dependent edema, right? On examination, so he gave history of swelling of legs. So you proceeded to examine and saw it was a pitting type of edema. Then distension of the neck veins. Then enlargement of the liver which are soft and tender, that is tender hepatomegaly. Then patient had oliguria and nocturia. Okay, patient complained of oliguria, decreased volume of urine, nocturia, increased urination at night. Then jugular venous pressure is increased. Then the investigation showed that urine contained albumin, X-ray showed right ventricular hypertrophy, ECG showed elevated P wave, blood was nothing significant. So this was the history. Now what is your diagnosis? So what are the key points that you got from the history? One is you came to know it is a dependent edema, pitting type of edema. Then distension of the jugular veins of the neck. Then there is tender hepatomegaly, oliguria, nocturia. And examination revealed right ventricular hypertrophy and elevated P wave. So this is a case of heart failure you all came to know. What heart failure? Is it a right heart failure or left heart failure?
Right heart failure.
Right heart failure. Very good. Okay. So these symptoms I had shown. In right heart failure, it is more of dependent edema, hepatomegaly, distended jugular veins. Okay, so here in this patient, it is the signs and symptoms and examination is suggestive of right heart failure. So if the patient would have presented with P&D or orthopnea, and on examination, if you would have all this cough, crackles, wheezes, blood, then it would be left-sided heart failure. But here, this is a case of right heart failure. Okay, now how do you explain the dependent edema and enlargement of liver? How do you explain the dependent edema and enlargement of liver? What is the reason for dependent edema in right heart failure? What is the reason for dependent edema in right heart failure? Anybody wants to answer?
Peripheral edema.
Pooling of blood in systemic circulation.
Yes, yes. So whenever the right ventricle fails to pump blood, there is congestion of the systemic circulation. Okay, so because there is congestion of systemic circulation, it is like first right ventricle fails, blood starts accumulating in the right atrium, right atrial pressure rises. Then still backwards, that there is congestion of the systemic venous circulation, venous pressure increases. Still backwards, the capillary pressure increases. And you all know that filtration is taking place in the capillaries. So when capillary pressure increases, there is more movement of fluid from the circulation into the interstitium, resulting in edema. Okay, so this is the sequence of events in right heart failure. Similarly, congestion of hepatic veins, enlargement of liver, and it is tender hepatomegaly. It is not just enlarged. If you palpate, the patient feels the pain. That is tender hepatomegaly. Then P wave is elevated. Okay, P wave is indicative of what it reflects. You have P, Q, R, S and T. P wave reflex is due to atrial activity or ventricular activity? Atrial?
Atrial.
Yes, it is giving an indication of the atria. That is depolarization of the atria gives the P wave. Now elevated P wave indicates there is hypertrophy of the right atrium. So because the right ventricle fails, there is increased right atrial pressure, which results in increased hypertrophy of the right atrium. Therefore, you get an elevated P wave on ECG. Okay, so this is the case scenario of right heart failure. Right. Similar history if it comes with orthopnea, proximal nocturnal dyspnea, then crackles on lung auscultation, then fatigue and all, then it would be a left-sided heart failure. Okay, clear. So this question can be clubbed with your cardiac output, because ultimately heart failure is related to cardiac output. So cardiac output questions can be clubbed here, and it can be asked as a 10 marks question, like factors regulating cardiac. Briefly describe the factors regulating the cardiac output. Clear? Because the heart failure is related to cardiac output. So questions related to the physiology of cardiac output can be asked here, giving this case scenario, and it can be asked as a long essay type question, 10 marks question. Clear? So it is, I am telling it again and again, you need not be stressed or worried about case scenario. Case scenario will be given to you, but the questions will be all physiology only. Like if hypertension case scenario is there, questions will be related to physiology of blood pressure. Okay, if you're getting a case scenario of myasthenia gravis, the question will be neuromuscular transmission. Similarly, if you're getting a question of MI or angina, the question will be related to the ECG. Okay, we are not completely asking the treatment part or management part like a final year student. So case scenario will be different, but what questions related to your physiology thing only. So you need not be worried or stressed about case scenario, right? So prepare accordingly. It will be easy for you all to answer. Okay, and if case scenario is the main purpose of case scenario is to make you understand the physiological aspects of regulation. So if this case scenario would not be there, then heart failure would be just a passing discussion for you. Now because it's given as a case scenario, you try to understand everything, why there is dependent edema, why there is distension of the neck, why there is hepatomegaly, why the patient has oliguria, why the patient has nocturia, why the patient has jugular venous pressure is increased. All this you will try to understand, and that will help you to treat the patient better when you will be going in as you become an internee or when you become a postgraduate student. Okay, anything else you want to know? So these are my references. Anything else you want to know? So what you do today, you go back and once again look at all the slides. The slide has been uploaded, and try to read the physiology textbook and try to understand things. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. Right? So if no questions, how are you all studying? I think more than 15 days, and syllabus is being covered at a good rate. How are you studying? I think you people shortly have MCQ test also in physiology on CBS. So keep studying things, and if you are going hand in hand with the things that are being covered, that will be easy for you. And since you are at home, you have ample of time to study. You can spend enough time for studying and try to understand things, try to memorize things, try to remember things. Okay, so if you understand, cardiovascular system is the easiest of all the systems in physiology, right? Anything else you want to know? Okay, I think in CVS only some 1 or 2 topics more left, and once they are over, your cardiovascular system will be completed. Okay, I think only 1 or 2 topics more left in CVS. Otherwise, majority of the things have been covered, and it will be shortly completed. I think this week it will be completed. Okay, then thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.